The lacto fermentation process really gives these ingredients, the serranos, the strawberries, so much flavor. I'm fermenting the strawberries when they're coming into their peak season so they have the best flavor possible. The process takes about 3 to 4 weeks. We're gonna start with the fermentation process. Very basic, very simple. And then we'll move on to making this beautiful hot sauce. So let's get to it.
Very simple ingredients, complex flavors. Serrano peppers, fresh strawberries, 2 garlic cloves, a handful of cumin seeds, and fine sea salt. Now, when you're picking out salt when you're fermenting, pick salt out that is not iodized, no preservatives, no anti-caking, nothing, 100% salt. For the water, I like to use filtered water or bottled spring water. Very cheap choices. Now we want to get these serrano peppers and the strawberries ready for fermenting, so I give them a light rinse under cold running water and let them air dry. I'm going to slice the serranos about 1/2 inch thick medallions, making sure to check the insides of the peppers and make sure there's no rotten seeds. Make sure that placenta is nice and fresh. The green on the pepper itself is nice and vibrant. For the strawberries, hack off the tops, and each strawberry is going to get cut into quarters. I like to keep the strawberries bigger in size because they have a tendency to soften more than the serrano peppers do during the fermentation process. The larger strawberries get quartered, smaller strawberries get halved. Once again, these strawberries are nice and fresh, and that red color is nice and vibrant. The fermentation process really plays well off of that natural sweetness that the strawberries have. 4 garlic cloves, give them a light smash on the cutting board, remove that outer papery layer, and I like to keep all my sauces very professional, so I cut those root ends off the garlic cloves. Minor details like this really do make a humongous difference. The minimal amount of prep work has been accomplished. Set a mason jar on the scale, set it to grams, zero it out. Now we want to place all those ingredients into that empty mason jar, starting with the cumin seeds. Next go in the garlic cloves. Now after that, the strawberries and the serrano peppers. Now, as you can see, those ingredients are starting to fill up that jar quite nicely. So I take my fermentation weight and lightly press all those ingredients down into the jar. No worries squishing those ingredients down. That natural juice that's in the strawberries will actually help aid in the fermentation process. Now we're going to fill up our mason jar with water that's bottled spring water or filtered water just to the bottom of the neck of the jar. Now you need to take note of the weight that it says on the scale. In this case, it's 844 grams. Now using simple math, we're going to multiply that by 3% or 0.03, which gives us 25.32 grams. That is the amount of fine sea salt that we're going to need in order to make our brine. Place an empty mixing bowl onto the scale, zero it out once again. Now add the calculated amount of fine sea salt. If your scale doesn't read in decimal points, go ahead and round to the nearest whole number, which would be 25. Carefully pour the water from the mason jar into that mixing bowl. Give that a thorough mix to fully dissolve the salt into the water. I highly recommend putting your fermentation projects into some sort of a glass container, such as a glass Pyrex dish or a glass pie dish in my case, to catch any kind of overspill. Now that that salt has been dissolved into that water, carefully pour the water back into that mason jar with the strawberries, the garlic, and the serrano peppers. The next step is we need to put a fermentation weight into the jar. I'm using an empty baby food jar that is glass. You could also use a Ziploc bag filled with water or buy a fermentation weight. Now we need to pay very close attention to the water level, as you want those ingredients to be kept completely submerged underneath that water. That is called an anaerobic environment. Let this ferment on the countertop for 2 to 3 weeks. After about day 3 or 4, you should see fermentation bubbles, which I kind of like to describe it as very lazy carbonation. You can see the bubbles start to collect on the side of the strawberries. Sometimes they like to collect on the taper on the neck of the jar as well. Like I said, you want to put this on the countertop, really anywhere that's away from direct sunlight. I have a little pocket in my pantry that I keep all my fermentation projects in. The key is to keep the fermentation projects at room temperature. 68 to 75 degrees is where they're happiest at. Make sure to label and date all your projects. That way you can easily keep track of them. Every once in a while, my fermentation projects will actually develop some comm yeast, which is harmless to people. It just has an undesirable flavor. We definitely don't want to be making a hot sauce with comm yeast in it. If you do develop it, use a spoon to scrape it off the surface and just be careful not to get too much of the comm yeast into the brine. After the fermentation process is done, before we make the hot sauce, I check the pH of the brine itself. 4.6 or less is desired. Generally speaking, this usually sits about 3.6, 3.7. Fine mesh strainer placed over a mixing bowl, strain the contents of the jar, reserving the brine. The strawberries are actually quite delicious eating them as is. I mean, they have a nice sweetness to it, they have a nice saltiness to it, and they pick up the spiciness from the serrano peppers. They are delicious and spicy. It's perfectly normal for the colors to dull out slightly from the peppers and the strawberries. Trust me, the flavor is all there. Now in order to make this into a hot sauce, put all the serranos, the garlic, and the strawberries into a high power blender. And that brine that we reserved, we're actually going to use that now in order to blend up our sauce. So fill up that container, whatever it is that you're using, a blender or a Nutribullet, and fill about a quarter way up with the brine. You could add more for a thinner sauce, less for a thicker sauce. This attachment that I have for my Nutribullet has 6 blades on it, which is perfect for making a nice puree. Let it rip for about 30 to 45 seconds or until it is perfectly blended. I love the consistency on this sauce. However, I do like to have smoother sauces, so I'm going to go ahead and strain mine out. Strain the sauce out through a fine mesh strainer and of course have a mixing bowl to catch the puree. Now I'm going to use a small ladle to lightly force that puree through the fine mesh strainer. What is left behind is the pulp and the seeds from the serrano peppers and the strawberries. But don't throw that pulp away. You could dry it out, grind it up in a spice grinder, add some salt, which you will have a beautiful homemade seasoned salt. I love the consistency. Like I said, you could add more brine if you want it thinner, less if you want it thicker. Give it a taste to make sure you don't want to add anything else. I mean, you could add some cumin, you could add paprika, chili powder, kind of whatever it is at this point, but I kind of feel that it has a perfect amount of flavor as it is. Save that brine. You could use the brine to make vinaigrettes, or you could use it as a part of a marinade as well. Keep the hot sauce in a mason jar or whatever kind of hot sauce bottle that you have, and that will keep in the refrigerator for 3 to 6 months if you don't use it all by then. Enjoy.